afternoon and welcome to the Boise Metro Chamber Legislative Update Series. My name is Tori Thomas. I am the Community and Government Affairs Manager here at the Chamber and your host for today's event. The Boise Metro Chamber is Idaho's only five-star accredited chamber and represents more than 1,900 businesses. We are only able to provide current events and educational content because of our members and their commitment and their investment in our community. Before I introduce our panelists for today, I want to thank Optum Idaho for their generous support. Please enjoy this quick video from our sponsor.
There are so many beautiful places in rural Idaho, but living in these lower populated areas can sometimes mean limited access to mental health resources. To help, Optum and Hello Idaho are now offering free mental health first aid training for adults. Trained community members can be a potential lifeline for many struggling with mental health or substance use issues. To learn more about this free training, visit optumidaho.com.
For today's legislative update, we are joined by Senator Doug Ricks, Commissioner Tom Dayley, and Boise City Councilman Patrick Bageant. Senator Doug Ricks is a fifth-generation Rexburg, Idaho resident. He is a retired university administrator and small business owner and served as a House representative in the Idaho legislature for 2 years before becoming a senator in 2022. Senator Ricks and his wife Melissa have been married for 37 years. They have 5 children and 4 grandchildren. Welcome, Senator Ricks.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
Commissioner Tom Dayley is a fifth-generation Idahoan. He served in the United States Air Force and in the Idaho legislature. Commissioner Dayley has been married to his wife Catherine for 53 years. They have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. And one more quick fact about the commissioner, he is the 9th child out of 12 kids. I couldn't resist sharing that because I'm the second oldest of 8 kids. So your family has us beat, but I love seeing big families. Thanks for being here today. And last but not least, Councilman Patrick Bageant. He has worked as a municipal firefighter, EMT, and helicopter repeller for the U.S. Forest Service. Bageant is now an attorney with a focus on intellectual property disputes, recovering losses for victims of fraud or Ponzi schemes, and other finance and business matters. He is a guitar player, woodworker, and archery hunter, and can be found often in Idaho's backcountry with his dog Tig. Welcome, Councilman Bageant.
Oh, it's nice to be here. I should have brought Tig.
We would have loved that. Next time, I'll bring mine too. Well, thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate the time that you've offered to share with us today. So starting today's conversation, I'd like for all of you to explain to our audience how property taxes affect each of your units of government. So starting with the city, then we'll move on to the county and state. Can you share how property taxes are levied, collected, spent, and the authority of the legislature over local governments? So Councilman Bageant, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, thanks. First of all, thanks for having us. Thanks, Optum, for making this possible. It's a privilege for me to be here with these gentlemen. I'll take the last question first. How does the legislature, what authority do they have over local governments? That's the easy one. They have all of the authority. Cities in Idaho are political subdivisions of the state, and the legislature is in charge. So what they say goes. The rest of your question about how property taxes are levied or collected or how they affect us is more complicated. As to put it as simply as possible, the way it works for cities in Idaho is a city sets its budget. It determines how much money it needs in a coming year. And then it works in conjunction with the county assessor to add up the value of all real property in the county. That total value is divided by a percentage that results in the amount of money that's needed for the budget. That's a hyper simplified version of it, but that's basically how it works. So we determine how much money we need to raise in property taxes, and then the assessed value of all the real property in the county is divided by whatever number, that's the levy rate, a percentage that produces the amount of money that we need for our budget. Every step of what I just described has caveats and well actuallys but technically, but at a really high level, that's how it works. Budget, add up the value, divide it by a number, produce the amount of tax to be levied from each person, and then that money is remitted to the city, and we spend it on providing the city services, police, fire, city employees, parks, all of that. Property taxes make up about 65% of our city budget here in Boise.
Wow, thank you so much for that introduction and that breakdown of how it works in the cities. Commissioner Dayley, can you add to that? How does the county differ from the city with respect to how property taxes are levied, collected, and spent?
Well, I think I would agree with the councilman in terms of we, the counties, are also creatures of the state. So the legislature really sets the parameters around, one, the property tax in general, and then how we collect it, and then how we distribute it. So I think it's really important. This is one of the most important questions, actually, because property tax, as the councilman said, is one of the largest component parts of revenue for cities and counties. So we really do view what they do and how they do it, the legislature, in terms of it's very significant. And property tax, then, it relates also to the individual, especially property owners, because it taxes in a unique way one of their most important investments. So property tax for property owners is really, really important. But one thing that I think is important in terms of the counties that people need to understand is counties do not actually, they collect the taxes, but they distribute it to the collecting entities, as the councilman said. And they are taxing districts based on the taxing districts. And in Ada County, we have 42 taxing districts. If you put up the first slide, I will kind of go through that in terms of the county. This slide we have, and we have all of these slides on our website, so anybody interested can go through this at their leisure. As you'll notice, there are 42 taxing districts on the right-hand side. Those are the individual districts in the county. And then secondly, the county actually, as the councilman described, collects the taxes for those entities and then distributes to those entities. And if you notice on the left-hand side of this, that shows in Ada County the percentage of the total property tax collected and what the entities are. And if you notice, the cities are the largest. We collect taxes for cities. That's the largest number, 32%. Then the schools, we have school districts, more than one school district in the county. And then if you notice over on the left side of that circle, that's the percentage of the budget that the county commissioners actually have discretion over. That's about 22% of the total taxes, property tax collected in Ada County are ones that the commissioners have discretion over. And if you look to the left of that, you'll notice of that amount that 22% we collect, the majority of that goes to fixed items that the legislature mandates, either the Constitution or the legislature. Constitution mandates we have to have a sheriff for law enforcement. County jail, we have to have a county jail. The courts, we have to administer those. So those are the largest items in our budget are those mandatory items that are required of us by either the Constitution or the state. Now, if you look at the taxing districts themselves, though this is where it becomes critically important for individuals to focus. If they have a property tax question, the budgets are set by those taxing districts, and then the taxing districts send that figure to the county. We then put the levy rate, the taxing rate, on the individuals. And if you'll notice, those county taxing districts are listed here. And it's important for people to understand that's where they can engage in terms of addressing the tax amount that they spend or that they are assessed. Because each taxing district has to go through, and if you'll notice on here, and people can go through there and look at it in detail, most people don't even know which taxing districts they're in. And the average taxing district in Ada County homeowner is in between 5 and 10 taxing districts. most people don't even realize they're in that many taxing districts. So they need to look at their tax bill, or their tax assessment. If you'll put up slide 3, that's the assessment. That comes out as required by law. The assessor has to assess all the properties in the county by January 1st of every year based on that assessment. And you'll notice on this is a assessment notice in Ada County. The taxing districts are on the lower portion of that, and you can point out the places that actually where you can go to engage with those taxing entities so that you can actually be engaged in how they, one, assess the, create their budget, and then how you have to pay your taxes as a result of that. If you put that on the next slide, that's actually the tax bill. And on that tax bill, that shows how much tax you're paying to each of the taxing entities. Again, the county just simply takes the budgets of these taxing entities, puts them together, and then based on the assessed value in the county, as the councilman said, then we send out the tax bill, or the treasurer sends out the tax bill accordingly. So, and then just and Senator Ricks is going to go through this in some detail, but the last slide we did, he's going to go through 292. We had asked the assessor to look at property values, and this is just one segment of 292, as Senator Ricks is going to describe, just the property tax on the individuals who have homeowners exemptions. This is based on our estimate of what their tax relief will be based on their property values, like $100,000 of value. That's what it would be for that portion of 292. And so Senator Ricks will get into the details of exactly how 292 is implemented later.
You're on mute, Tori.
Wow, we thought we'd be over those days, but we're still here. Commissioner Dayley, thank you so much. That was super informative. It's great to have those visuals and just all the information that you just shared. So before we get into House Bill 292, I do want to give you, Senator Ricks, an opportunity to cover anything that you feel like Commissioner or Councilman did not cover. So give you a moment to do that.
All right. Well, I'm not going to correct anything the councilman or the commissioner said, because they're right. So one thing that is true is that the local taxes that are collected through property tax, they don't come to the state. However, the legislature does have purview and sets the laws and how all that works. And so it's kind of an interesting relationship there. You know, on that particular tax statement, I was glad to see the tax bill itself. It showed on there. There is a little link listed on the tax statement that goes to the treasurer's website that specifies and gives a list of all the voter-approved bonds and levies. That's actually a piece of legislation I carried a couple of years ago that required that, but it provides some disclosure for those who look at their tax statement and say, well, how many more years is this bond or this levy got on it, whether it's schools or cemetery or other taxing district bonds or levies. They can go to the treasurer's website and they compile a list of those and how many years they've got and the levy rates. So as part of the disclosure part goes, but yes, the state itself controls the laws and the guidelines on how the cities and the counties operate.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That's very interesting about the treasurer's website as well. So sticking on the, three different forms of government, or three different units, Councilman Bageant, would you explain why the issue of property taxes can be so contentious between those units of government? And speaking from a city perspective, what challenges do you experience with the way things are currently structured?
Yeah. I'm not sure if contentious is quite the word I would use. They're definitely strident or intense conversations, and they should be. They're, as the commissioner pointed out, this is taxing of the most important asset or the most important property many people own, which is their homes, or the farmland that provides their sustenance or their business, or it's their property. It's a big deal. So that's part of it. It's personal for my constituents. I'm sure for all of our constituents, property taxes are personal in a way that some other taxes aren't. And then secondly, I think, I grew up in a very rural part of North Idaho, and the world is different there. It's very different than the view from City Hall in Boise. And that's one of the awesome and wonderful things about Idaho. But in the property tax conversation, I think sometimes it's a weakness for us. And it's a weakness because the needs of the constituents in a very rural part of the state are just fundamentally very different than the needs of my constituents in a very urban part of the state. And so, I will be the first to say that most of my constituents don't understand what life is like in the rest of the state. And I think inversely, that's kind of true too. I think many other parts of the state don't quite understand what life is like for some of my constituents. And the reason that matters in a property tax conversation is we have a uniform formula for property taxes. Everybody does it the same way. And speaking only as the council person from Boise, this has had a pretty big effect on us. I don't know that doing it differently in different ways is the right way to address it, but the result of a uniform formula for my city and the property owners in my city has been a really crushing property tax increase. And the reason for that is because, as we all talked a moment ago, the amount of property tax a person pays is fundamentally tied to the assessed value of their property. And here in Boise, the assessed values of residential real estate have gone up dramatically, hundreds of percent, whereas the assessed value of commercial properties like big box stores and things like that have stayed flat or fallen. And so what that means, you can really nerd out on the math, and I don't want to do that, but what that means is that each year homeowners are paying more tax, and in many cases commercial property owners are paying less tax. The thing I always try to illustrate to remind people of this is, if you're a citizen of Boise and your property tax bill has gone up by more than 3%, somebody else's has gone down. And that matters a lot over time. It's kind of this ratchet effect for homeowners in my community, where in 2002, property tax receipts were about 50-50 from commercial and residential properties. In 2012, it was 45-55. In 2022, it was 75-25. And that's tens of millions of dollars that have been shifted onto homeowners. And at the rate that real estate values keep changing, it's going to continue. You can talk a lot about whether that's fair. I mean, the value of people's property has gone up, but it has real painful, really heart-wrenching impacts for some people in my community, particularly people living on a fixed income. Somebody who bought their home in Boise and raised their kids in it in the 70s and 80s, and they're now relying on Social Security or a small pension, and they get a certain amount of money every month with a $7,000 to $10,000 property tax bill it's more than a lifestyle changer. I mean, it is a financial destroyer of particularly elderly people on fixed income, military veterans, the disabled. It's a real human problem, which, circling back to the beginning of your question, I think also adds to why these conversations can be so passionate.
Thank you. I love that you mentioned, just how personal it gets, and maybe not even contentious, but people are passionate. I just had a conversation with my dad the other day, and he was saying, how much passion shows how much you care. And it humanizes things when you put it into a human perspective. So thank you for sharing that. I would, if you wouldn't mind, could you share a little bit on House Bill 389 from the 2022 session? Can you just give a summary of what that bill intended to do and then what the impact it had on local governments was?
To me? Yes. Okay. The bill was intended to provide some relief, and it did. The impact on local governments, not terribly significant, right? It's going to, Senator Ricks can explain this in much more detail, but it's going to provide relief by rebating or otherwise contributing to the property tax. It's going to rebate or reimburse people or otherwise contribute to the revenues that we would get from property tax from other sources. So from our perspective, we're more or less going to be made whole. We're not going to feel, it's not going to reduce our receipts or cause a major disruption for us. For homeowners and other property owners, it will provide some relief as it was intended to do. We're very grateful for that. And I appreciate that. Big picture, I think the senator would probably agree. These conversations aren't over. It's not a final fix. And I'm sure we'll be talking about property tax in the next legislative session as well.
Yes, I think it'll definitely be an ongoing conversation. It's interesting to see it, continue, and it's good to have these conversations. So we appreciate all the work that continues to be done. So Commissioner Dayley, on that same note, from a county perspective, what do you feel like the challenges are, and how do they differ from those that Councilman Bageant just described in terms of the way the current setup is?
Well, I would agree with the councilman. I'm sure Senator Ricks would agree as well that this is an ongoing issue. I mean, it's something that we need to continue to, as I told my children when they were growing up, every time when they made a decision, we did something, whether it was a positive or negative result, is what did we learn from this? And if we can learn something from what we do and how we do it, and then move forward and make appropriate adjustments. And I think that's what the property tax issue is going to be. I would like to follow up on what the councilman was talking about, though, in terms of, I agree with him, it doesn't have to be contentious, but one of the things that, as I said, the taxing districts set their budget, and then based on that budget, the assessment, the tax that's actually paid to that entity, we assess, we collect, and then give it back to those entities, the cities, the schools, whatever. And when the entities themselves can carve out special segments, like he was talking about commercial versus residential, they can carve out some areas of the city, commercial areas of the city, that have special taxing privileges. Then, as he said, that then transfers the tax to someone else, either for a short period of time or permanently. So those are the kinds of things that we have to get in, the people engaged in viewing all of those processes. One of the things that I always wanted to do in all of my public service is engage people. I think that's what our system of government was designed to do, and is engage people, whether it's a state, local, or city level, or the federal level. And so I think it's really important that we keep our people engaged in the processes so that they do, in fact, let us know not only how many tax dollars we're collecting, but also where we're spending those dollars, which then relates to how many dollars we actually have to collect. So in answer to your question, I think each section of government, whether it's the legislature, the cities, or the counties, we have different roles, we have different functions, we view our budgets appropriately differently, and then we try to address the issues that are presented to us by our constituents appropriately.
Awesome. Thank you for that explanation. So I'm assuming it's probably safe to say that all of you have heard from your constituents that they want property tax relief. So we'll dive into that a little bit. We'll start with you, Councilman Bageant. What is the primary concern you hear from your constituents, mostly in Boise, but you can offer some perspective from your home in Northern Idaho as well, addressing property tax relief, that is.
The most common comment is my property taxes are too high. I can't afford to pay my property tax, or I shouldn't have to pay this much. And people are right. Something I was thinking about before we met today was it may be that property tax is not really the right way to fund a lot of things. And the reason I say that is it's not obvious that the value of real estate correlates very well to the value of services we provide, at least here in the city. And I think that the most recent legislation, in a way, is almost a concession in that direction, because it's taking tax revenue or state revenues from other sources and directing it to provide property tax relief. So I'm kind of hopeful that we, in the years to come, as the legislature continues to work very hard on this, we may see some more creative thinking along these lines. The thing that I hear most from constituents is my property taxes are too high. And the immediate conversation that follows, exactly as the commissioner pointed out in his initial presentation, is, well, is it really your property taxes? Everybody gets one bill, and it actually includes all of the taxing districts on it, that, from mosquito abatement to school levy to everything. Property tax is an element of it, but it's not the entire bill. So the conversations I have with constituents start with somebody saying my property taxes are too high. Then we get into how people are being taxed. We see that a lot of it is property taxes, but it's not all of it, and that helps educate people, and it helps them understand that their decisions at the ballot box on bonds and levies and all sorts of things affect these issues. And then I usually end up having a conversation with constituents about the burden shift issue. It is real and it is significant, and it's just a pure function of how property is assessed. We did the math last year, and because residential properties have gone up so much in value, in order to keep every residential property owner's property tax bill flat last year, we would have had to cut the entire police department and a third of the park department. That would buy us 1 year. The following year, we'd have to cut the rest of the police department, the rest of the park department, and the entire administrative arm of the city. And that's not, those numbers are crazy. And the reason that that's true is because so much of our city operations are funded, or put it this way, so much of our property tax receipts are now coming from homeowners as opposed to a broader swath of the city. Everybody agrees it's an issue that needs to be addressed. Everybody agrees it's important. Everybody has different perspectives or different ideas on how to do it or what needs to be done. Kind of contrary, frankly, to I think the popular opinion in both the media and sort of the public conversations about this, I do believe that the legislature is working really hard. And I do believe that it's very, very challenging in the State House to do this, because the needs of people across the state are so different. But everybody takes it seriously. Everybody agrees it's important. Every session, it gets worked on really hard. And I think we're going to get there. I don't know if it'll be in the next session, but I think we're going to get there, because it is such a big problem. And it's so top of mind for the constituents of each of the people on this panel.
Totally. You mentioned just how many people are grappling with property taxes and with different ideas, and creative ideas at that, to come up with different options. And so, coming from somebody that is learning so much about property taxes, being in the position that I'm in, it's just really interesting to see how many things are covered by those, and the conversations that are around it. So, bringing up your point of the legislature doing a great job and having these conversations every single year, Senator Ricks, I wanted to chat with you a little bit about House Bill 292 that came about this year. That offered a lot of support, that got a lot of support from the House and the Senate. Would you mind walking us through the details of that bill, and then the later iteration, House Bill 376? What are some of the high-level components of that legislation and the impacts on taxing districts?
Okay, thank you. So this legislative session, we did try to address some of the property tax issues. House Bill 292 is a step in that direction. It's not a fix-all bill, but it does provide some property tax relief for property taxpayers. The largest share of that is going to be realized by homeowners with a homeowner's exemption. They'll end up getting roughly about 2/3 of that amount that was allocated for it. But it was developed to try to help provide some relief, and it doesn't fix the issue of shifting. That is something that we'll have to continue to look at and address. There are some ideas that have come forth, and no doubt we'll pick some of those up early in the session next year and try to move some of those ideas forward. But 292 uses a new concept that it takes some of the dollars, as we've explained, that the property tax dollars that are collected on a local level, all those monies collected stay locally. They don't come to the state. But 292 provided a way to take some of the sales tax that is collected by the state, and our state sales tax collections keep growing every year. They've been very robust and very steady. And so what House Bill 292 does is take 4.5% of the total amount of sales tax that's collected in this big pot and redistributes that back down in the form of property tax relief. So there's kind of two sides to the bill that came about from different ideas, one from Senator Groh and the other, which is targeted mainly to property owners, homeowners. And the other side of the bill is targeted more for paying down school bonds and levies. And that came from the House side, primarily from Representative Monks and Speaker Moyle. And so the bill basically takes this 4.5%, it's an ongoing amount year after year, and so it'll provide ongoing, property tax relief that will come down. This first year, and you'll actually see some reduction on your property taxes this year in 2023. There's roughly up to $355 million that's been appropriated. That'll go towards the property tax relief. In next year, 2024, you could see up to $272 million. And it's a little bit less because there's extra money that were left over. And so we grabbed some funds from a couple of different areas to add to the pot this year to make it a bigger impact this first year. Some one-time monies that were left over and not used in other, like the property tax relief for the rebates and whatnot. And there was some appropriation, but the second year you will see up to $272 million, roughly 60% of that will go towards homeowners and 40% will go towards the school side. In 2025, the third year, you'll see about $332 million. That'll continue to rise based on the sales tax projections and estimates. And you will see at that time, it'll kind of stabilize a little more, where about 51% goes towards homeowners and 49% goes towards the school side of your property tax statement. So as you know, and as what was shown there, in fact, what did you say? Ada County has 42 taxing districts. That's a lot of moving parts there to keep track of, and budgets and different funds that you got to distribute back out for those. But what the property tax bill will do is, some of that money, roughly, or at least $100 million a year, will go to the school side of the bill. And that money will go straight to schools, and it's their responsibility to subtract that out from what they need, because that's supposed to go to pay down the bonds, levies, and then if there's extra money left over, it accumulates in a particular facilities fund that the school has to create and cannot be used for other purposes, but it's designed specifically and dedicated for the purpose of new buildings or building facilities and to help out that way. They can't use it for teacher salaries or things of that nature. On the growth side of the bill, with the property owners, that money will go directly to the counties. The counties will subtract that out from the amounts, and Commissioner Dayley showed an example that it might be, what was it, 12% roughly on some of the snapshots that you did there, you showed on the slide. And that'll be subtracted out, but you will see on your particular property tax statement, there will be a line item there that indicates the dollar amounts that were contributed by the legislature to pay down some of your property taxes. So that will be disclosed on your property tax statement. Another part, there's two other parts of the bill that it does. It does increase the circuit breaker amounts. Yeah, there's the savings of 12% right there. So it shows some of those savings, and that'll be an ongoing amount. But it increases the circuit breaker levels up to $37,000, I believe, on the income. It was around $31,000, and then it increased the value factor up to $400,000 on the base. So that'll help. There's a lot of the seniors that seem to roll off of the amount of being able to qualify for the circuit breaker. So this will bring a whole bunch of those back into this program and allow them to receive some additional property tax relief through the circuit breaker. And it also removed the March election date that schools use for bond and levies elections. And so that was a bit of a contentious piece of change to the legislation. The House was a little more prone to remove that than the Senate was, but in the end, we all agreed to that and removed that. And in fact, that was one of the sticking points. As you know, the governor vetoed this bill initially, and we had to override his veto in order to get this passed, along with the trailer bill. So the trailer bill, House Bill 376, really just fixes a couple of things that we found after the fact in 292 that needed to be addressed. And the main part was have to do with the TECM bonding. TECM is a transportation, I can't remember, congestion mitigation something. I can't remember the way the acronym itself, but it's designed to allow the state transportation department to use this pot of money, and that comes in every year. It's roughly $80 million, and to leverage that to go out and bond up to, I think it's $1.5 billion. And so they can do road projects throughout the state by borrowing and bonding against that money coming in. And House Bill 292 initially put the priority at the very top of the pot of money, the sales tax money, to take it off the top first instead of TECM, and it put TECM below that. And the House Bill 376 fixed that and puts the TECM back at the very top, the first dibs on the sales tax money before the rest of it's paid out. And that fixed the issue that was brought up regarding bonding and for road projects throughout the state. So that was the main part of the fix in House Bill 376. So that's how that particular bill works. There's a lot of moving parts. I don't know if anybody's got questions on that.
Tori, can I jump in just briefly to apologize for something?
Oh, I'm sure you don't need to apologize, but sure.
Maybe I do. When the senator was talking, I realized that you hadn't asked me about 292. You asked me about 389 from the previous session. So I gave you an answer on 292, but if you have time and you want to circle back to 389, I'd be happy to share thoughts on that too.
Yeah, please, if you would like, we can jump to you really quickly and chat about 389 from last year and get your perspective on that.
Yeah, sure. Just very briefly, 389 did a couple of things. It adjusted the homeowner's exemption, and it beefed up or assisted in the circuit breaker in being more effective. And both of those things were incredibly helpful. Again, not long-term fixes. I think we should always probably view the circuit breaker as a patch. The homeowner's exemption changed, but maybe didn't change enough or didn't be flexible enough. At any rate, it helped a lot of people. We're out, council members are volunteering, city staff is volunteering on their own time in Boise. They're out knocking doors on individual homes to find people who qualify, particularly for the new circuit breaker, to tell them to please apply for it and make sure they know it. And we're doing that because we can, because the legislature adjusted the laws to make it possible for cities to do this to help people. And we're very grateful for that. It's made a difference, and we're appreciative. So to the extent, I don't know the extent Senator Ricks was involved in that, but to the extent that he was, it's been helpful to my constituents. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for that update. I'm glad you jumped in there. That was a really confusing bill. That was my second year in the lobbying for the chamber with the legislature, and I always had so many questions about the tax bills, especially. So we appreciate all the work that the senators and the representatives do, because that's definitely not where I'm good. It's not where my talents lie. That's for sure. So,
Tori, I just as a follow-up comment to the councilman as well as the senator, again, a thank you to the legislature for the heavy lifting they did this year to help us try to address this, especially when it required what they did at the last an override of the governor's veto. But they are percentages, back to what the councilman was talking about, shifting. Sales tax is collected statewide, but then what they did is the legislature dedicated a portion of that. We always have had before a formula of sales tax distribution to local governments, but this is a dedicated for property tax relief as a portion of sales tax revenue, which is critically important because it does translate directly to the property tax owners. And so I just, again, a thank you to the legislature for the heavy lifting they did. It was significant. There is more that needs to be done. Another thing in terms of the shifting from commercial to residential, that's something needs to be addressed. But part of it is an information. In visiting with the assessor's office, it's difficult for them to get the same kind of data on values for commercial property as it is for residential property. It's relatively easy for them to get it on residential, much more difficult on commercial. So that's part of the disparity between the commercial and residential taxing is the values, establishing values in a real way.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
And can I interject a little bit one more time on that? I appreciate the comments there, and the shifting is an issue. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. I'm a new chairman this year in the Rev and Tax, or the local government and taxation side on the Senate. We've got a new chairman on the House side, Representative Monks. We work together a lot to keep House Bill 292 on the tracks, and not come off. It just about did at the end. It did require, a lot of work to keep that going and to override the governor's veto and address his concerns as well. And I will note, I'm going to do a little dig here, but Republicans voted for it. Not a single Democrat voted to override the governor's veto, which I was disappointed. Even the ones that co-signed on the bill, I'm not quite sure why they didn't want to override the governor's veto, but it did take the Republicans to make this happen. They do get the credit for this, for keeping that train on the tracks. They didn't get help from the other side when it come down to the nitty-gritty of actually providing the property tax in the end to the homeowners on this situation. So hats off to the Republicans. But
Briefly, I want to, from the city of Boise, give the Republicans credit in the Idaho legislature for getting this done. Yeah, seriously,
Yeah.
thank you. I take your comments to heart, and I do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. But we do have a lot of work to do. There's different ideas. One of them that was brought forth initially by Representative Gannon, our good Democrat. He wanted to bring a 5-year averaging option, and so it would actually claw back some of the values of homeowners' houses right now, residential property. If you average over 5 years, it would bring some of that down, and it would probably raise some of the commercial. So it would claw back some of that and reduce the rates of the valuations. And so that is something we're going to look at as one idea. But it's going to continue for a number of years on the conversation. If the residential had not risen so fast and so quickly, it would have been easier to make these changes 5 years ago before this huge wave of increase happened. And then now that we're in the middle of that, it's harder to claw some of those values back. And so we're looking at ways to try to make it equitable. You can also argue from the commercial side that, well, hey, we're not, commercial properties are not doing as well. They don't have the resale. They haven't had the markup like you have in residential. What's fair to them? Is it fair to them to pay more, even though their values haven't gone up? And so there's a lot of different conversations that have to be had here and figure out what the policy is. And from my end of it, on the state legislature side, I do appreciate input from our locals, our counties and our city folks to try to guide us and give us advice and recommendations, because it's hard to get some legislation passed. You get 105 legislators, a majority of us to agree on some of these concepts. It's not an easy process. It's easier being a county commissioner. You only have to convince one other person to go your way. And that's oversimplified for sure, but it's very long and difficult conversations, and we do need support and input from our friends in the cities and counties. Thank you.
Yeah, we love to hear that. We are big advocates of, making sure people, especially in the business community, but even just people in our communities, reaching out to lawmakers and to elected officials to let them know, how they're feeling about things, but also to thank all of you, because there's so much work that goes into it and so many different perspectives to have. It's not just this one conversation. There's so many different, people, and just lots going on, lots of different hats, lots of different people wearing different hats and, trying to do different things. So we appreciate all the work you guys do. So we'll jump back to Commissioner Dayley for just a second. Talking about House Bill 376, what are some ways that local county commissions can work together to implement the tools that were created with that bill?
Well, I think this is like all the bills, whether it's 292 or all the bills. I think the dynamics of each one of them are critically important, is how we put the pieces together and learn from what we're doing. Just as a follow up on the what Senator Ricks said in terms of the dynamics. Yes, at the county level, it's a double-edged sword. Two can make a decision, but we also can't have discussions of any nature without having two and having an open and public meeting. So it's a double-edged sword in terms of how we create policy and come to conclusions on issues. But in answer to your question, the 296, all of the bills, they take the same kind of work and effort. And I will focus back on what I was talking about before about individuals. Most individuals don't realize, one, how their taxes are created, especially property tax, by budget and then the levy based on the assessed values. We also, as county commissioners, are under the Constitution and law the Board of Equalization, which means we meet every year and review all of the taxes, assessments in the county, and we have to, by law, equalize them. In other words, equal distribution of the taxes fairly. We have to make that decision. So taxpayers can actually come to us and discuss with us that what they consider their assessment is versus the assessment of their neighbors or other people within the county. That's part of the process that is there to review the dynamics of each one of the laws and how they're implemented. So in answer to your question, I think 276, 292, we're working through right now the dynamics of 292. State Tax Commission has to establish, back to what Senator Rick said in terms of the amount of money that's going to come to the directly to the taxpayers vis-a-vis the school districts. It's based on student counts. It's based on where they apply that, whether it's to bonds or whatever. All of that has to be translated back down to the local level, which then relates to what I was talking about. The individual citizens need to review this, be engaged in the process so that each one of those taxing districts can have input from the community at large on how this law is being implemented. And we at Ada County have created on our website a section which will actually and be updated on a regular basis as these information comes through. If you want to learn more about 292 or the other property tax bills that were passed and how they're being implemented, we're going to have something on our website that gets updated on a regular. It's there now with information we have so far, but it'll also be updated on a regular basis so that individual citizens can go in there and look at what's going on in the property tax realm and how it's being implemented, and then go back to their taxing districts, identify who they are based on their tax bill, and then there's a telephone number and a contact point for each one of those taxing districts that I showed on the slide. And you can then actually interact with, whether it's the city, the school district, as a mosquito abatement district, whatever, and find out what they are actually going to do vis-a-vis the budget, which then translates back to your property tax directly.
Wow, I love that. That's very cool, and I will definitely be sending people that way. I also will be checking that out. A little plug for myself, I just bought my first home, so all of this is really informative, and I'm excited to keep using all of your resources as to offer my success in my home. So as we wrap up this really great conversation, thanks again. I want to ask just one last question for all three of you. As we move forward, what's the most important discussion that can take place next? Councilman Bageant, we'll start with you.
Well, on the policies, I have some perspective. I think the burden shift is a big deal. There's specific, things we can talk about, but the most important thing is that we have a policy conversation that is directed towards continuing to move closer to a tax system that is fair and equitable for everybody. Look, everybody has to pay in to make the fire truck show up. Everybody has to pay in to have a park. Everybody has to pay in for police and libraries and everything else, schools, all of it. But the overarching goal should be that people pay in fairly, that whatever we do with the public money is something that the public supports, that the government is an expression of the will of the people, and that the government taxes people fairly and equitably and evenly. And I have no doubt that is the actual goal, that's why the issue has been challenging in the legislature, because there's so many different perspectives, why it's challenging for more local people like me and the commissioner, because our hands are kind of tied in a lot of ways. But everybody agrees it's important, and I think everybody's trying to get to the same end goal eventually. And that's a fair, even, democratically Republican form of government that taxes its citizens fairly and justly. And that should be the overarching goal, as opposed to any specific particular policy item. And I think if we can all keep our heads on straight, and if I can do my job to contribute the information that may be helpful to the senator or other members of the legislature, I think we'll get there, as I said earlier.
Awesome, thank you. And then Commissioner Dayley?
I would agree with the councilman. The main thing is fair and equitable, as he stated. But then another thing that we need to review is exactly what are those services that we want. One that was graphically portrayed to me when I came on, as I went around and visited all the agencies of county government, and EMS, emergency services, was one of them. And as I went out with them on some of their calls, it's one of those things that we don't even think about until we actually have to use it. But when we have to use it, we want that EMS person to be there. If there's a heart attack or something like that, we want that EMS person to be there timely so that it can address the issues. That's one of the areas of county government that we actually fund at the county level, the county commissioners. That's important. It's in the background. People don't realize it until they actually need it. And then they recognize, yes, this is an essential part of our county government that we do not want to be underfunded. So that again goes back to the engagement of the individual, so they can look at those taxing districts and say, okay, this is really important. I really think this is important. I need to engage with them so that they can know that that's important in their budgetary process.
Thank you. And Senator Ricks?
I think it's important to keep the conversations open and discussion. You know, I look at it as a perspective. I'm sensitive to the property tax payer and the homeowner, and especially those that are retired on fixed incomes, where they, you know, I know we have to keep budgets in check and provide services as needed. That's very important for sure, especially emergency services. But I do look and try to be somewhat of an advocate for our property tax payers and feel the burden that they feel. I live in a district right now, my city, Rexburg. 58% of the property is tax exempt in my city boundaries, city limits. And so a lot of shifting has gone on, and we pay a higher tax amount because of that. And so I'm very sensitive to putting more burdens, more straws on people's backs with some of these budgets. But nonetheless, we do have, you know, obligations to make sure that those services are available. And so I just like it when cities and counties can run a pretty tight ship and figure out ways to do things for less and keep their budgets as tight as they can. I know with this property tax bill that we have, House Bill 292, the 12% and more, it can go between 12 to 15 to 20%, depending on what area that you're at in the state on tax relief. But if budgets in the city level and the county level don't kind of hold the line, you know, they can grow within a few years and kind of negate whatever discount that we've provided or relief just by growing the local budget. So, you know, it all has to work out, and we all have to work together to provide the services. But again, I'm very conscious of the property tax payer and trying to make it so we don't tax them out of their homes that they can't afford just to live in their homes on a fixed income.
Thank you for that response, and thank you all so much for being here today. It was super informative. We really appreciate all the work that you do serving our community and state, and we're appreciative of our sponsor today, Optum Idaho, along with our media partners, Idaho Capital Sun, Idaho Education News, Idaho Press, and Idaho Statesman. Thank you all so much for speaking today, and also to all of you that joined in. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
Right. Thank you.
You.
Take care.